I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad to be here because I love using the microphone. I have been working on this talk since, what time is it? I woke up this morning and said, Jesus, I'm in big trouble here. I put something together. The title of this show, The People of Athens, I have no idea what that means, but don't worry, I am going to make something up. I'm really glad you folks are here. Last year, I gave a talk about food, what kind of food is healthy to eat and how do we know. We focused on carbohydrates, fat, and protein. All food is made of one or more of those ingredients. And I really gave that talk as a prelude to lay the foundation for this talk that I'm going to give today that talks about the effect of animal agriculture on our world. Before I get to that, let me give a brief overview of what we talked about last year. Really, in that talk, I just made 2 points. I said, don't worry about getting enough protein. We do. And eat a lot of plants, a lot more plants than we're used to eating. Hunter-gatherers, who I'll talk about in a few minutes, ate 10 times the plants we eat. So if we quadrupled our plant intake, we'd be good to go. We'd be doing much better. But let's talk about protein first. It is the Wild West with protein. You know, you never hear anybody say, hey, you really ought to have a second piece of pie. You might not be getting enough carbs. And nobody says, you've got to get more ice cream. You're probably not getting enough fat. You don't hear that. But protein, everybody wants to make sure they get enough protein, right? That's just common wisdom. And it's really not true. The USDA says you and I need about 60, 70 grams of protein. And just for reference, because we're not all walking around thinking about grams of food. 2 eggs, a piece of chicken, a cup of yogurt, a small handful of beans or nuts or seeds. That's 70 grams right there. That's all the protein you need in a day. You and I get more than that. Americans get about 100 grams of protein a day, more than almost anybody in the world. Now, I had a patient tell me just last week that he was at the gym and there was a sign there on the wall saying, make sure you get your 140 grams of protein a day. Wow, it's a lot. And that gym person was not alone. Peter Attia, a great author who wrote a great book called Outlive, How to Live Long, advised we all get 2.2 grams per kilogram of protein a day. That's 3 times what the USDA advises. There are a lot of ways to look at this and sort out. There's some controversy about that. There's actually been a debate about this for 150 years, and don't worry, I'm not going to take you through that. I want to give you just one example, though, a common sense example. We looked at what babies need. And the reason that's useful to do is in our first year of life, you and I know exactly how much protein we need. We never know after that, but in year 1 we know because we have breast milk for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So nature has declared what we need, and nature is right. What do babies need? 1.64 grams per kilogram of protein a day. Twice what the USDA advises for us. Yeah, that's a lot of protein, but look what they do in that first year. They triple in size and grow 10 inches this way. It's extraordinary. You know, I weigh 195 pounds. Unless I get on a scale, then I weigh 215. So I weigh 195, and I want to add 5 pounds of muscle to my body. I know you're thinking, Joel, you don't need to, you look great. No. How much extra protein do I need to do that? And the answer is none. I can just take the regular amount, eat healthy food. What you need to build muscle is exercise. That's the problem with exercise, at least in my experience. Every gram of carbohydrate or fat that we don't need gets parked right here. Look at me, ladies and gentlemen, I'm an expert. That's true for protein as well. Any extra protein you take that you can't burn or turn into muscle while you're using it, it's going to get stored. It gets break down to a keto acid, and that gets stored as fat, just like carbohydrates and fat do. So we get enough protein, and it's actually a problem to get more protein than you need for most of us. Not everybody's overweight, but most of us are a little bit overweight and would like to lose a little bit of weight. And thinking you need a lot of protein is counterproductive to doing that. So that's what we had to say about that. We also talked about hunter-gatherers for good reason. We've been around as a species in one form or another for 300,000 years. And for all but the last 10,000 years, we lived as hunter-gatherers. And those people were incredibly healthy. Our two leading causes of death, yours and mine, are by far heart disease and cancer, and they had none of that. And it wasn't because they didn't live long enough to get it. Hunter-gatherers live into their 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s. The Chimene hunter-gatherers in Bolivia are an example. They die from infection, not heart disease or cancer. So it's really worth looking at, what do they do for a living? What do they eat? How do they eat? What kind of food are they eating? We should be eating what they're eating. They evolved to do well doing that. They ate plants and animals, just as you would expect. And it's tempting to think, oh yeah, good, we're good to go. You and I, what do we eat? Plants and animals, right? Not really. We eat overwhelmingly processed food that's made from plants and animals. And you might think, sorry, I'll get the hang of this. You might think they're really the same thing, but they're not. Okay. It's okay, I'm going to get extra help after the show. There it is. Orange juice and oranges are completely different food. Orange juice is sugar water with some vitamins mixed in. Oranges are oranges. They're really loaded with water and fiber, along with those vitamins and minerals and some simple sugars. But it's completely different, and you and I were designed to eat oranges, not to drink orange juice. It's a real problem. Bread and pasta are not plants. They're made from plants, but they're not plants. Most of what we eat is processed food. But what I also want to point out on this graph is just a tiny fraction of what we eat, it's actually less than 10%, is really plants. And hunter-gatherers were eating lots and lots of plants. Sure, they ate meat too. That's fine. That's not a problem. I'm not saying meat is bad for us. I will later in the show, but not now. But plants that was a big, big part of their diet. So that's one difference between us. Another one is, come on, Joel. Another one is, there we go. The argument goes, they ate a lot of meat. We want to be just like them. We should eat a lot of meat too. And we're really not just like hunter-gatherers in at least one important respect. They need it to eat meat. We don't. It made a big difference. Now I'm saying they need calories, which they do. That was their reason to live. They were in a desperate search of calories for most of their lives, and obviously we're not. We've got all the calories we need. That's not our problem. What do calories have to do with meat? Let me show you. You might be surprised. Let's look at three types of food. Animal food over here, and two kinds of vegetable food. Starchy vegetables and fruit and non-starchy vegetables over here. And look at the same amount of food for each of those categories. Same number of grams, 100 grams, let's say. How many grams are in each of those three types of food? How many calories are in each of those types of food? And for animal food, it's low to mid 200s, okay? For 100 grams of that food. What about starchy vegetables and legumes? Half that. Half that. And what about non-starchy vegetables and fruit? Half that again. Healthy food that you and I think of as healthy, chicken, poultry, turkey, has 4 times the calories of non-starchy vegetables and fruit. It's an extraordinary difference. That doesn't mean that meat is bad for us, but if we're trying to lose weight or maintain a healthy weight, that's worth considering. It makes a big difference. That's why if you look at this graph, there was a huge change from 1960 to 2010. Our IQ skyrocketed in the United... Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. That's a mistake. It's not our IQ that skyrocketed. It's our weight. That looks more familiar, doesn't it? Our weight has gone up. We've gotten more and more overweight in the last several decades, and that's because we've got an abundance of processed food, but also, ladies and gentlemen, because we're all conditioned to think we need to get a lot of protein. Animal protein is a great source of that. We ought to make sure we get some meat or fish or something like that in every meal, or at least once a day. It's really important to do. That's a real challenge if you're trying to limit your caloric intake and do it in a healthy way without dieting, because as you and I know, dieting never works. Tell them I'll be right with them. So that's that. The change in IQ over that period, I have no data to support it, but I think it looks probably like the inverse of that graph. Something like that. That's just my recollection. I've got 3 kids. I don't want to go into details about that. So we talked about that. And then finally we talked about which source of protein is better for us, animals or plants. And the truth is, animal protein is absolutely good for you. It's not a problem. But plant food is better for us than animal food. There's no question about that. If you look at our leading causes of death and disease, cancer and heart disease included, plant food dramatically reduces your risk for those problems if that's the main part of your diet. That's just so. That's why if you look around the world at the healthiest people who ever lived in the so-called blue zones, what do they have in common? A largely plant-based diet. You and I do not eat enough plants. And I think part of the reason for it is, when we were growing up, you and I, the understanding about a healthy meal was always an entree and a side of vegetables, right? And it should be the converse of that. It should be vegetables with a side of entree, mostly vegetables. What I've asked my patients to do time and again is make lunch and dinner overwhelmingly, at least 3/4 of the plate, vegetables, and you will be good to go. And we've got that instinctive thing about protein. I just want to come back to that once more, because you might think, well, if I'm just eating plants, I'm not getting enough protein. You are. We get more protein than almost anybody in the world, as I said. And if you compare us, by the way, to the people in the world who get the least amount of protein, that's in rural India, they get in just about half the protein we have. Guess what their rate of muscle wasting, called sarcopenia, that can occur with age. You know how that is over the age of 40? You wake up and it's like, what happened to my muscles? They're all disappearing, which is true. That will happen to all of us if we don't do something about it. But it's really tempting to think, oh, I got to get a lot of protein so I get my muscle back. Well, if that were true, we take in about 100 grams a day of protein. India takes in about 50 grams a day of protein. Their rate of muscle loss ought to be much higher than ours, right? It's not, it's the same, 17%. That's the rate of sarcopenia in both countries. They're doing just fine on 50 grams a day. You and I, unfortunately, again, we need exercise. That's really what works for us to preserve muscle mass. So we talked about that. And that was the gist of my talk last year. And where I'd like to go now, having made my case that plant food's really good for us, and it's not that animal food's a problem, but we don't need it, is to talk about one problem that is true about animal food, and that is its effect on the planet. So, as you folks know, global warming is a hell of a problem. And we are headed for, in the next 25 years, crossing that 2 degrees Celsius increase threshold, after which we get mass loss of species, both plant and animal. 90% or more of our coral reefs will be gone. That supports 1/4 of all marine life. The polar ice caps on both ends of the planet are melting, and sea levels will rise, coastal erosion will progress, and we have more and more of the crazy weather that you and I have become accustomed to. It's a problem. What I want you to know is, let me bring up the next slide. This is telling us a simple story. I know it doesn't look like it, but it is telling us a simple story, and that is that man-made greenhouse gas emissions are not the primary cause of this problem. They are the sole cause of this problem. That's what that graph shows. We are doing this to ourselves, and we've done it quickly. We've done it in the last 100 years. And a big part of how we've done it is our dependence and our growing affinity for animal agriculture. Let me show you what I mean by that. It's true in 2 respects. One is, as the population of the world has grown, but more important, the income in the world has grown, more and more people can afford to eat animal food, and they are doing that. So over the last 50 years, and the trend has continued beyond 2009, animal food has become a bigger and bigger part of the world's diet. The second problem with that is if you compare the ecologic cost of animal food to plant food, it's unbelievable. Any animal food is at least twice as expensive ecologically compared to plant food. For beef, it's off the chart. If you look at the use of land, fertilizer, water, pesticides, and fuel, it costs 10 times more or more than that to grow a pound of beef compared to growing a pound of plants. It's extraordinary. And the effects have been profound. And that's because 40% of the Earth's surface is devoted to agriculture. It's a big, big industry. And of that, 3/4 of that goes to raising animals to be our food. That is why of those greenhouse gas emissions that are causing the problem we're contending with now, 1/3 of them are due to raising animals to be our food. And we're running out of planet. Since about the 1980s, every yard of land that we use, every ounce of water that we use for irrigation is getting depleted. We're in deficit spending on our planet. We're using more land than the Earth can replenish. We're using more water than the Earth can replace to grow this food. 1/3 of the forests that ever were are gone. Now those forests have been lost in the last 10,000 years since the birth of agriculture. But ladies and gentlemen, half of that loss has occurred in the last 100 years. It's really accelerating. We're heading in the wrong direction and speeding up while we do it. 70% of deforestation in South America is due to changing forest land to cattle grazing land. That's a problem in part because, as you know, forests are what are called carbon sinks. That's where carbon dioxide goes to get converted to oxygen, which we need. And we're losing that property. So, animal food is really expensive ecologically. It's a problem for us. And it's not just a problem on the earth, on the land itself. It's a problem in the water. Let me show you what I mean by that. This is called a CAFO, a concentrated animal feeding operation. And since about the 1980s, this is where over 90% of our animal food is grown in these buildings because they're climate controlled, they're really efficient, the animals are packed in there. It's a really economic way to raise animals and grow them to be our food. Those CAFOs, as they're called, produce a lot of animal waste. There are thousands and thousands of pigs in those buildings that we see. And the fertilizer that's used to grow the crops to feed those pigs is rich in nitrogen, as is that animal waste. Those two things have that in common, nitrogen. So what? Here's the problem. That nitrogen from the animal waste and the fertilizer is either dumped or leaches into our waterways, our rivers and streams. Why is that a problem? Because algae love it. The algae flourish. And when these algae blooms form, as they are here, the sunlight can't get beneath the surface of the water. It's covered by algae, and the water beneath it loses oxygen. Eventually, the algae themselves become so dense that they collapse and fall to the bottom where they die, and they are consumed by bacteria. That uses oxygen. So what? Half the rivers and streams in the United States do not support marine life. They're dead. That's because of this stuff. That dead water flows down to the Gulf of Mexico, and we have dead zones in our ocean, the largest of which is right there in the Gulf of Mexico. That's a picture of it, a graph of it. Half our coral reefs, which support 1/4 of marine life, they're gone. That happened in our lifetime. 90% of all the large fish in the oceans are gone. That happened in our lifetime. We're killing our planet. The land can't support what we're doing, and the water can't support what we're doing. Ladies and gentlemen, for the oxygen you and I breathe, every other breath we take comes from the ocean. The ocean makes that oxygen for us. We run out of ocean and we're I'm not here. So it's a mess. It's a freaking mess. And there's really good news in that. Really good news. I just described a hell of a problem that everybody thinks, oh my God, we're going to have to take sailboats to London, we can't fly, we're going to have to ride bicycles to work, we can't drive, we're going to have to walk, we can't use a bicycle, I don't know what. I'm not an expert on global warming. But what's clear to me is a big, big part of this problem is so easily solved, and you and I can do it right now. All we got to do is eat plants. And the problem goes away. If we ate the average of a Mediterranean pescatarian or vegetarian diet, greenhouse gas emissions would stop increasing today. If we ate plants instead of animals, just by doing that, we would meet the Paris 2050 climate goals. It's a huge benefit because we'd be addressing a huge problem. And that's really appealing because there's no sacrifice involved. This food is less expensive and it's healthier. It's better for the planet and it's better for us. What's to think about? One other thing I want to point out. In public health, there's a concept called One Health. And that concept goes like this. Anytime you propose an intervention, a fix to a problem, consider three main players, always. Those players are us, human beings, the planet, and animals. The reason they suggest doing that, and it's become really popular to do it, is because those three players, animals, the earth, and humans, have a lot to do with each other. For better or worse, we have enormous influence on one another. So if you're going to propose to do something to fix a problem, take all three players into account. Now today, I've talked to you about how eating plants is good for us, and I've talked to you about how eating plants is good for the planet. But I haven't talked to you about what it means for animals. And let me do that for a couple of minutes, and then I'm done. Remember I said these animals are in CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, and those are really densely populated buildings, and they're really economically efficient, and they work, and they can make a lot of money doing it. Here's the price that the animals pay for that. They're in cages so small they can't turn around, and that is where they spend their lives. That's where pigs live. This is where poultry lives. They have 6 to 10 hens in a cage. They can't move. This isn't for a few hours or a couple of days. It's for their life. That's turkeys. This is roosters. Thank you. Thank you, Heidi. And this is cattle, and that's where they live the whole time. It's awful for them. Animals that don't survive to be slaughtered or discarded in dumpsters. These animals feel pain, fear, and sorrow that we inflict on them. And we can do better. We can do so much better. They need our help, and we are responsible for them. You know, we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions and calories and grams of protein. Those are all quantifiable things, and they matter. I'm 65. That's old. I know you don't think it is, but it's old. I know that. I understand it. And I don't think I've learned anything of substance in my life, except maybe for one thing, because even I get it after 65 years on the planet. It's important if we want to live peacefully, just at peace, that we live with compassion and with hearts that are open to the people we love and to the life that we touch. And we can do that, you and I. We can do that and solve this problem by doing it. A Greek historian once, in a tribute to the people of Athens, called them, "They who made gentle the life of the world." And we can do that. We can make gentle the life of the world, you and I, just by making these changes. And we can let that be our legacy. Thank you so much.